My name's Alison, and I'm from LGA Architectural Partners. You may know us also as Levitt & Architects. That was our old name. So today I'm going to present two projects. I'm going to keep it simple, maybe a little short, but the projects that I'm going to be discussing highlight different scales of redevelopment. Alexandra Park is a redevelopment of an entire city block within the urban core of Toronto. And Madison Avenue, the second project, is one single building on an urban infill brownfield site along a rail corridor. What links these two projects is that they have affordable housing as a critical component of redevelopment. So the title of the presentation is Rethink, Rebuild, Renew. And I think what is most important with this is the rethink, and that's how architects and urban planners need to rethink their approaches, not only to design, but to engagement when working with communities who are in affordable housing. Oh, we've lost it. Okay. So the first project is Alexandra Park, and this site sits north of Queen Street and south of Dundas Street, just west of Spadina. You may be familiar with the site, but you may have never actually gone through it. It's an incredibly insular community that is owned by Toronto Community Housing, and it has 18 acres and approximately 101 affordable housing units in a mixture of townhouses, mid-rise, 5 to 12-story apartment buildings, and then one high-rise tower with seniors apartments on it. So this insular community is surrounded by an incredibly diverse part of the city, an incredibly vibrant part of the city. We have Dundas Street and Kensington Market to the north, a very low-rise, formerly residential but now commercial and retail community that's incredibly vibrant but disconnected from the actual fabric of Alexandra Park and the residential neighborhood. Then we have Spadina Avenue, of course, Chinatown there, but it's again disconnected from the fabric with these large point towers that are not point towers, sorry, kind of slab towers that are 10 to 12 stories along the west side of Spadina. Then Queen Street to the south again, and then Bathurst lines the edge of the site on the west, and that's more small-scale, low-rise residential development. And it's kind of typical of a pre-war Toronto design. So what is Alexandra Park itself? What's the built form currently like? And how is that contributing to this insulation that it has? So there's approximately 2,500 people living in this neighborhood. And as I said, they're mostly in affordable rent geared to income units. There's a few market rate units sprinkled in some of the larger towers to the south, this 20 Vanali Street. Oh, thanks. So we can get it to work. There we go, 20 Vanali. So that has market rate units, but the majority are in these low-rise 3 to 3-story townhouse units that float within a kind of disparate landscape of parking lot as well as disconnected paved walkways and park-like spaces. So it really is essentially a community that's lost within a kind of realm of parking lots and disconnected from the city. So how did it get that way? Well, originally, Alexandra Park, before redevelopment in 1968, was connected to the city with actual through streets and linked to the city grid. You can see here, you have Augusta Street connecting all the way up. But in 1968, it was redeveloped by Toronto, or the forerunner of Toronto Community Housing, as a very top-down approach, following similar developments of the time, Regent Park, St. Jamestown. It was a big, bold move, and it was done all at once. So Jerome Markson was the architect, and he was following best practices of the day, inspired by the Garden City movement of providing quality, affordable housing to to essentially what they would refer to as the poor at that time, but also to Ville radieuse by Le Corbusier. Ultimately, the project disregards the needs of the residents because it lacks a human scale. So after a decade or so of it being built, the neighborhood began to experience issues of safety, of permeability, of eyes on the street, and it became time to figure out what to do with it. Sorry. So this is just a photo of the context you have, like I said, floating within a series of parking lots. And this is the built form that's predominant in Alex Park. So you can see all of the buildings were developed at the same time, and they're developed in the same manner. It's a vast expanse of the brown brick. There's very little differentiation between individual units. It's difficult to tell your block from the next block, your unit from your next door neighbor's unit. And then thresholds are lacking that clearly define public from private. So residents on Benally Walk, which is this area here, this is one of the few pedestrian linkages through the site. But it also serves as a service way for maintenance access and theoretically for the public to walk through. But look at the link between a person's front porch and the main walk. There's barely any change in surface texture and in differentiation between the public and the private. The whole property feels very much like it's a semi-private realm. Similarly, simple things that are very important to residents living in a community, such as garbage pickup, are really quite challenging. Residents are required to drag their garbage through to distinct spots to be picked up because there are no streets for any servicing to happen like you would normally have in a kind of standard residential neighborhood. Pick up and drop off, again, is very difficult because there are no street routes into the neighborhood. And even for somebody who has a mobility issue, you can't get a taxi in there either. Few of the buildings even have street frontages onto major streets. So if I go back, you can see here at the top, Dundas, which is such a vital artery within the city. All of these buildings here have backyards facing onto this area here. And what this does is it disrupts all of the commercial and retail that's along the north side of Dundas because there's no hard edge on the other side. So the whole property is essentially this vast, what you could term perhaps wasteland. I wouldn't like to say that because the residents would be upset with me, but that's what happens to these spaces in between. They become disregarded by the people who live there and shunned by the public who has no real need to come into the community. So what does this mean for the community that lives there? Has it affected the community that lives there? Yes and no. This Alexandra Park community is unique in that it's very closely knit and has a very strong group of residents who are committed to living in this community. They understand that they are very lucky to live downtown in townhouses that are quite generous, and that they have all the amenities they need as far as social infrastructure with community centers that are close to them. It's really just the fabric of Alexandra Park that's broken. So what that meant is that the community itself was the ones that started this whole process of redevelopment. They were the ones that approached professionals, such as Urban Strategies, who worked with my office, LGA, to create feasibility studies to convince Toronto Community Housing about this redevelopment and to convince them to move forward and to actually redevelop the entire site. Alexandra Park, unlike Regent Park, was not on the table for redevelopment. People thought that, the housing was in relatively good shape for its age and it was not going to proceed. So this really was the impetus of the community pushing to have their space that they valued but knew needed improvement so that other people could see the value within their neighborhood. So working with urban strategies, the community groups and urban strategies kind of came in onto two key characteristics of this neighborhood that really made it a prime candidate for redevelopment, and that's its lack of density. So Alex Park has on average a density of 109 units per hectare, but most of that's taken up in the few towers that are on the site. In reality, if you kind of averaged it out, it would be really closer to 64 units per hectare, which is similar to a neighborhood like Riverdale, you know, an older, not terribly dense neighborhood, but still a very urban site. So that was incredibly important because the land value associated with Alex Park is so high. So the community was able to, the community and urban strategies was able to convince TCH that they could leverage this density into a funding partnership. So the community groups, Toronto Community Housing, and private developers could really bring revitalization to the neighborhood through a sharing of the density on the site. But of course, the community group wasn't going to just hand over their neighborhood to private developers. So again, what makes Alex Park very unique is that the community came together and developed these 10 principles that needed to be applied by any developer, by any landscape architect, or by any architect involved in this redevelopment. So these guiding principles, you can see here, I'm not going to read all of them, but the most important ones from LGA's perspective and from the community's perspective is this zero displacement policy. So the residents are so strongly attached to their community that they didn't want to move out during development. And this means that they had to be accommodated on the site through a phased construction process. So either TCH would move you directly into a new unit, or you would be moved into some vacant units on the site. So TCH would control the level of people through turnover of any vacant units. From LGA's perspective, another very important aspect of this set of principles is providing good housing. We think that affordable housing is high quality, good housing. It shouldn't be any different than market rate housing. And it should include all of the aspects that any person would want. You shouldn't know the difference between an affordable housing unit and a market rate unit. So given that they had this zero displacement policy, the entire master planning process is based on a 10 to 15-year plan. So ultimately, this revitalization project is more like an urban evolution project than a kind of one and done big sweeping project like the initial one was. So how did all of these principles get brought down into an actual concept? So there's three major moves. You can thank urban strategies for a lot of these diagrams too. The first was to reconnect the streets back to the urban grid. Very simple idea. Jane Jacobs approved. Also a way of rationalizing access, not only for the residents, but also for the public, get people onto the streets, and a way to encourage wayfinding, making people's units easily identifiable, but also making this neighborhood easily identifiable. The second was creating a varied and responsive built form that broke up the homogeneous quality of the original development, that gave a sense of ownership to different individuals within their site. You can determine which house is yours. You can clearly mark your territory from the public to the private, and that you have your own plot of land, you know, clearly defining backyards, clearly defining where private amenity space is versus where public amenity space is. The third item was providing a distinct open space system. So the original development had these disparate parks, some of which occurred at dead ends that became felt very unsafe. You know, they may not have been actually unsafe, but there was this perception of them being unsafe because there were no eyes on them. So then, of course, that leads to people not taking care of them. And there was also a kind of disconnect between what was a area that needed to be maintained by Toronto Community Housing, and what was actually a public park space that was maintained by the City of Toronto. So the third element is really keeping the landscape and green that characterizes this neighborhood, but connecting it and making it read from Queen Street to Dundas Street so that the public knows that they can actually utilize this space as well. So here are the connections. The first step, bringing back the streets to Alex Park. So from the south, we connected a dead-end street that was Benally up to a new street called Carr Street here, which connects east-west from Augusta out to Cameron Street here. Then we continued with reconnecting Grange Court. This street was existing originally in the street grid, but was deleted in the 1968 renewal project. Other key element, of course, was reconnecting Augusta Street, so you get that link back to Kensington Market. And then, of course, pedestrian linkages through the green spaces like I was speaking of. So we have these long linear band of park space that will have cycling routes as well as pedestrian routes that are clearly marked out. So you really get the vitality from Queen Street moving through the site and up into Dundas. Then, of course, rebuilding density. So this is where the funding for the entire project comes from. It's finding the correct unit mix. And this is where a lot of LGA's work and where a lot of urban strategies work happened. We needed to find the right mix between townhouses, which the community was they were very clear that they wanted to keep townhouses. The residents were not going to be essentially downgraded into apartment units. They knew they were lucky having three-story townhouses within the downtown core of Toronto. So they insisted that they had to stay. So we needed to keep 333 townhouse units. But we also needed to find the area on the site to create the market rate density that would pay for these townhouse units. So that means, of course, increasing density through point towers in the purple, and then mid-rise units, which we sort of focused along Dundas Street and as well on Cameron Street. And not only would this increase the density, but it would also increase the mix of incomes on the site. So now having not just a small portion of market rate, but having an entire neighborhood that had market rate mixed in with the affordable housing would really bring back vitality and would bring back economic opportunity within this neighborhood. So just to break it down, the low-rise units are mostly focused on the south side of the site. This map's flipped upside down. Don't want to confuse you guys. But low-rise units, these are mostly TCH, and they're all attached to the new infill streets. So we're not repeating the same mistakes. Everyone has a front step, a front address. You can have access. You can have garbage pickup within all of these units. Then the mid-rise residential, again, is either podiums to point towers or actual mid-rise condominium units scattered throughout the site, but again, bringing kind of density along this edge of the site against the back wall of Spadina Avenue. So it's Cameron Street right here. So Cameron Street right now is very much kind of thoroughfare. There's no destination. But by bringing residential lobbies for the mid-rise units, as well as townhouse units that will be at the base of these, it really brings life to that street and makes it a destination rather than a thoroughfare. So the high-rise residential, again, forms gateways into the different nodes of the site and is really concentrated along Dundas Street. And this area will be the last phase of the development, so we can start to tweak the density and tweak the balance of units as the whole process continues. So the initial phase, which just finished up last summer, is down here with two kind of high-rise units. But as we move the process towards the north and the projects continue, we can adjust how things work and how the unit mix is developed based on kind of market needs and also on kind of increasing the land value to the south, it really starts to add land value to those future properties to the north. So again, this is just showing where the mixed uses will occur. So focused on Dundas, but also interspersing a new community center into the site and keeping a few of the items that the community really wanted to keep, including a convenience store and daycare within the tight center of the community. Then the parks. This is about rebuilding public amenity. The three linked parks form a north-south axis in the middle of the neighborhood. And they will replace, of course, the disconnected parks that I was speaking of. And they'll act as a backyard for all of the residents in this space, but not a literal backyard, which is what was happening before. They'll be clearly public, but they'll also have amenities for the residents in particular. So splash pads, playgrounds, and a basketball court. That was very important for the community to keep that. And there'll be a clear route through the site, as I was saying, north to south, that the public can take and feel safe in. So these are the big moves that urban strategies and worked on and that LGA contributed to. But LGA's main role in this entire project was the low-rise residential work in the first phase. And it was about taking a lot of the principles of the community, but also the kind of urban design principles of highlighting thresholds, creating individual identity, and bringing the site back to the public that we had to knit into our townhouse design. So our primary role, like I said, was test fitting a lot of these units to understand the density mix and to understand how much space we could actually take up with the townhouses without losing the mid-rise market rate density that we needed to fund them. So the units are quite tight. They're only 13 feet wide by 35 feet long. So this is kind of a small Toronto row house. But they're 3 stories tall and they have full basements, which is not provided in any other Toronto community housing project. This is very important for the residents because it gives you that extra space for which to grow. So it was always this balancing act of providing for the interest of the residents and making really livable units, but also understanding the economics of the property or of the redevelopment. So the majority of the units are 3, 4, and 5 bedrooms, and no resident was ever downgraded to a smaller unit. They could always move into a unit of the same quality. So we started looking for the exterior design of the units, just a typical Toronto vernacular. You have the front porch condition that you find in most Victorian neighborhoods within the city. And we also looked at townhouse and row house design, across North America, but also across Europe. So the terraced houses in England, in Bath in particular, walk-ups in Montreal, the brownstone in New York. All of these projects all of these typologies have clear differentiation between what is public, the sidewalk, semi-private, the front yard, and then of course the walk-up, which was critical for us to provide, and then the semi-private front porch that was covered. So the stoop is a critical piece of the entire process. Then it was about differentiating between the mass of the townhouse block to the individual unit. And we did that with bay windows and projections above. So residents are able to understand that, to differentiate their unit from their neighbors and to even point down the street. I live, three doors down from the yellow unit. And then, of course, landscaping was important as well. The small planting beds at the front provide kind of shaded privacy to the larger windows along the street. And the planting beds are an opportunity for residents to provide their own take on the front yard and to actually work the land there. So it really is about providing clear address and defining edges of the individual units. And this is, of course, in contrast to the original development. The second important thing for our role in the townhouse design was providing quality materials. Like I said, good housing or affordable housing is good housing no matter what. So that meant providing really durable materials that will stand the test of time, but that are also reconnected back to the vernacular of Toronto. So for us, that was brick. Brick had to be along the ground floors of the building, and if we had our way, we would have had brick throughout the townhouses. Brick, of course, has a dignity to it, but it's an incredibly durable material that is pretty good at resisting vandalism. And it also just projects quality to the residents themselves. Where we did have to compromise was in the volumes above here. It was originally suggested by Tridel, who are the private developer partners for this project, that we move to stucco from the entire facade, but that was something that we were not prepared to compromise on. And we were able to convince Toronto Community Housing that they shouldn't compromise on that either. The life cycle of a stucco building in our climate is not something that TCA should be investing in. They should be investing in long-term buildings, and the community was behind them because the community is invested in this site for the long term as well. So what we did compromise on was to create cement board on these volumes instead. It's still a relatively durable material. It was just a cost-efficient approach. And then, of course, the windows. We didn't scrimp on those either. We chose, very high insulated value fiberglass windows that are large, giving a lot of natural light into these units and increasing the eyes on the street. So the same approach follows to the inside of the units. And every time I look at these photos, I think, wow, that looks like any real estate marketing brochure that I get in my mailbox like 5 times a week. And I think that's a good thing, because this is just like anybody else's house. And it's a good house, and it's what somebody would want to live in. So the units might be tight, but they provided open floor plans. They provided distinct dining rooms, distinct living rooms, and an eating kitchen. This was very important for the residents. And all of these unit floor plans were voted on by community associations. We even had a meeting with only female residents of the community and only female architects from our office so that we could get completely unfiltered criticism of what we were providing. And it actually paid off, because we were originally providing kitchens in the middle of the units. And from feedback from the residents, they said, no, we want our kitchens in the rear of the house so that we can keep an eye on our kids in the backyard. And it seems like such a simple issue, but you need that feedback directly from the residents to understand their needs. We also developed unit plans that have different kitchen configurations. Some people wanted closed kitchens, so they didn't need to look at their dishes after they had prepared a meal, or there were cultural concerns about just people who was preparing dinner and you'd be entertaining in the front. You didn't ever want to see that. So we provide options for closed and open kitchens. And then, of course, just simple elements such as enough closet space and more than one bathroom for a 3-bedroom unit. And again, a bathroom in the basement so that people can actually work on this unfinished basement and create the space that they wanted. So it was really about giving the residents amenity that they could work with and giving them something that every other person in Toronto who owns a home has. So that's the first phase of Alex Park, and we'll be moving on to phase 1B this coming summer. And from there, there'll be other architects that are working on the future townhouses so that we get a variety of influences and designs within the community. So it is, again, not a top-down approach, but a very integrated approach and part of city building rather than the greater hand of one designer. So the second project, see if we can keep going, keep this one fast, is Madison Avenue. So this Madison Avenue is again a affordable housing unit, but it's one single building, and we prepared this proposal with St. Clair's multi-faith housing, and unfortunately it was never built. So St. Clair's is a not-for-profit group that provides housing for people transitioning out of shelters, for people with profound disabilities, and just generally affordable housing for families that require 3 to 4 bedroom units. Excuse me. This property is at Madison Avenue and advances similar goals to Alex Park in that it's intensifying a site that's relatively well served by social infrastructure and by a physical infrastructure of transit, and but it's on a brownfield site and is just a single building. So in 2003, St. Clair's was chosen by the city to redevelop a site that was city-owned. They would be handed over the site and given a small amount of grant money to redevelop. The rest of the construction financing would be taken care of by St. Clair's, and they would be responsible for managing the property as well as providing the tenants with services, social services within the property itself. That's what separates St. Clair's from affordable housing providers such as Toronto Community Housing, and that they actually provide services as well to their clients. So the site is located just north of DuPont Street and south of Davenport. This is Casa Loma here. So we have kind of the Iroquois Lake escarpment that separates the northern part of the site, and an active rail corridor from CPR that breaks the site from the annex neighborhood that's to the south. The site is also adjacent to some pretty high-end townhouses here, George Brown University campus over here, and a 12-story loft building to the east. So just a closer view of the site itself. And the Toronto Archives. How can I forget that? The Toronto Archives building is directly to the north, and its parking lot here. So this site is a brownfield site, and it also is a contaminated site, and this is what ultimately put the project on hold. The site has to be remediated with removal of petroleum products, VOCs, hydrocarbons from the soil. And unfortunately, St. Clair's was not able to afford these remediation costs, and the project went on hold. So this project was started in 2004, and the project went on hold around 2006, and then was again brought back through an RFP process just recently. And unfortunately, St. Clair's did not win the second time around, and it went to a private developer. But this proposal is what we reapplied for the funding for this project on. So because the site's contaminated, it meant that we couldn't do underground parking and we couldn't do basements on this site. The site's also, because it's adjacent to the rail corridor, it has significant issues with sound and vibration. So we had to be very conscious about not only creating a perimeter to the building that connects with the street face and with the adjacent buildings, but also buffers sounds for the residents themselves. And that's what started our massing. So this is where we really had to rethink the form of a multi-unit building. And what we're proposing is essentially 2 bar buildings that are connected by an exterior courtyard with exterior walkways. So we have a 4-story building on one side and then a 6-story building on the east side. They're connected by a landscape courtyard, and then each unit is a through unit, giving you windows on the exterior of the building, and then of course a little terrace and front porch on the interior of the building. On the roof, we were able to provide a amenity space, but also a very generous green roof that would act as urban agriculture that would be tended to by the residents themselves. So there are 66 apartments in this building, and they range from 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units. And the ground floors, here we have townhouse, double height townhouse units that face onto Madison Avenue. These on the first and second floor are also townhouse units, 3 and 4 bedroom units, and they have private backyards that face to the west and to the archive parking lot. So this is what this kind of form looks like in plan. So we were balancing between creating a very active, or enforcing an active public realm with front stoops and front lawns along this face, and then highlighting the street face with our office and elevator lobby on this side. And again, what makes the St. Clair's property unique compared to other affordable housing units is that the office is a point of connection between the social service providers and the residents themselves. So it's really a check-in place and also a point of secure entry. There are concerns from residents living within this building who may be transitioning from shelters about safety and about privacy. So we really worked on a sequence that would bring you from the public areas of the site past, a friendly face who knows that you're there, into perhaps an elevator lobby that we kept glazed on the outside and in view of this common courtyard for safety. But the elevator lobby, of course, wasn't heated. So it's this idea of moving from kind of outside of the building into a semi-conditioned space that is semi-private, semi-public, and then up through the property either to your shared walkway with your neighbors, and then into a smaller private front terrace, and then into your unit. So it was really about bringing different layers of public and private into the property. We also strategically located a lot of the social spaces and functional and cross-reference them with functional spaces on the property. So the common laundry room, again, is on the front of the building, facing the street and activating the street, but also in close relationship to the shared courtyard. And the shared courtyard also has a significant amount of bike parking and amenity. You'd have a play structure for any of the residents living within the units. Again, front stoops face out onto the courtyard, again keeping eyes on that space so that it maintains its viability as a safe place for residents to occupy. So the upper third and fourth floors are accessed by exterior walkways that overlook the landscape courtyard. And we made sure that by doing this, we were able to still buffer between public and private. So given the layouts of the units themselves, some bedrooms actually face onto, let me find one, sorry, so bedroom right there. Some bedrooms actually face out onto the courtyard and to the semi-public walkway, and that was a concern for us. So we started to manipulate the walkway with cutouts and with planting beds that would buffer and separate your neighbor walking by your bedroom window by 10 feet, and would also provide shading. And then, of course, would soften the courtyard itself. And then bike parking, again, because a lot of these residents don't drive, bike parking is very important. And keeping your bike close to your unit is also important if you have concerns about safety and about people taking your property. If you're coming out of the shelter system, that's very important to have your belongings close to you. So we kept bike parking up in these little pop-outs along the corridors. And as I said, we were concerned about buffering between the rail corridor that runs this length of the site and the units inside. So that meant that we paid close attention to the quality of the windows on the property, but also kept a lot of the permeability or the kind of permeable facade on the inside, and then a more private perimeter to the property. Unfortunately, this was also a requirement from the community surrounding Madison Avenue. There was a lot of feedback during our OMB hearings and during our zoning reviews that the neighboring residents didn't want private balconies facing out because they were concerned of affordable residents having what I would say, quote, junk on their balconies. So it was really balancing these concerns that I don't know are necessarily valid, but were raised by the community. And in order to get this project moving forward, we kind of inverted your typical apartment building. So this is what the courtyard could potentially look like. And this is just the comparison between the exterior facade, which we still kept pretty open with the townhouse entrances on the grade, and then Juliet balconies above, and then a much more permeable interior court with the exterior walkways and planters. On the rooftop, we had the indoor and outdoor amenity spaces, which we tried to keep very generous in this property. So when you do the calculations for the amenity space that's actually required for a development of this size, we only needed to provide 132 meters squared of indoor amenity space. We provided 185 meters squared to give the residents a space that they could maintain as their own community and encourage interaction between them. And then we almost doubled the exterior amenity space and included raised planting beds, as well as a green roof that has a 6-inch deep growing median, so you can actually grow something other than a sedum on these roofs. And the planting beds were designed so that they could support urban agriculture run by the residents themselves, so they could actually have vegetable gardens to supplement their diets. So it was providing this generous amenity space and generous. It's about being generous to residents, and just because they are getting affordable housing doesn't mean that they don't deserve to have quality exterior spaces, quality interior spaces, and to not have their spaces squandered. So this is just again a view of the the building on the exterior. And I think, kind of in summation, for both of these projects, so Jane Jacobs' quote, developing a city is easy. Rebuilding a living city takes imagination. And it takes imagination. It also takes engagement with the residents that are in that city, and that includes people who inhabit our affordable housing. So that's it.